Good morning, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining us today. My name is Julio Martinez. I'm head of programming at Expediente Abierto. And today we're going to talk about a subject that we think that is very interesting. It's a situation that's changing very rapidly with very kind of specific trends that we'd like to discuss with you. So I'm going to present for about 15 minutes, and then we'll leave a space open and talk about China and Central America and maybe even broader. So to start, this is the first time that we've presented here at China and the World. So I'll just mention a little bit about Expediente Abierto. It's a research center based in Central America, working on governance, security, and human rights. Among our programs, we work on transparency. We have a large program for investigative journalism with reporters in Honduras, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and El Salvador. And one of our programs is an observatory on China and Central America, which we've had for the past year. This observatory, and also to let you know why we're so interested in this topic, we cover China in various ways. We do in-depth reporting from each country. We do academic research on, say, influence on military issues between China and Central America, also on case studies, for instance, the rapidly changing situation in Panama and kind of the negative effects that relationship has had in the past few years. We also do events to talk to the communities in Central America about this relationship. And also we're doing something that's similar to what Leland just presented. We are tracking Chinese projects in Central America. The difference, there's some overlap. The difference is that this is official cooperation in the 5 countries, and essentially we are in the 6 countries, and we are just specializing in Central America, which allows us to also go deeper into some issues. We are constantly checking news in any of these countries, and our database includes promises and the status of implementation. Did it ever move forward? The methodology started off using aid data methodology from William & Mary, which had about 40 projects for Central America, and that ended in around 2017, and so we expanded that to include close to 200 projects. So we hope that this is a resource for our journalists, but just journalists in general and researchers to have a much better idea about what's happening in the region, and also be able to see trends over time, see where the particular interests are, and of course, plenty of sources on journalistic sources about this relationship. So I'll start talking about where we are in terms of the relationship between China and Central America. This is where the relationship was in 2007, which is the first country in Central America to switch the relationship between Taiwan to the PRC. So this is 2007, and then this is today. Essentially, in about 16 years, very rapidly, every country started moving forward. In Central America, only Guatemala and Belize still have diplomatic relations with Taiwan. And Guatemala has commercial relations with China. And so a big question also with the new government starting in January of next year is whether Guatemala will also switch. And a lot of people thinking that it's likely in the next couple of years. And of course, the pillars of this relationship are 1, commerce, 2, promises of infrastructure projects, and some infrastructure projects which are moving forward. And to a great degree, partnerships between the PR state media and Central American media, especially state-owned, state media and state communication apparatus. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in future slides. So part of the way, since these are new relationships, there's thanks. It's unclear exactly how, for many in Central America, there's lack of clarity on what the expectations should be. There's a lot of excitement about huge promises of investment. Each country talks about billions and billions and billions that are coming in, and talking about the huge economic benefits. So part of what we want to talk about here is that these promises and what's been the actual situation. So here we have some examples in Honduras, Some examples in El Salvador as well. And actually, this is a nice example because here we're talking about 137 billion that could come into the Honduran economy, right? So this is what's in the Honduran news. But when you start looking about with the countries that have the longest relationship, for example, Costa Rica, let's start with trade, for instance. There was, in 2010, Costa Rica had a trade deficit of about $100 million. That, over a little bit over a decade, turned into a deficit of about $3 billion. And also, exports from El Salvador, for instance, it's also been a couple of years, has also been very low. And we'll talk about what it looks like for the region. So also to get into economics, and since most of this kind of justification is economic, let's look at the reality of the economics. The places like El Salvador and to a great degree Nicaragua are talking about China replacing the United States as a trading partner. And it also works a lot for them because their autocratic tendencies seek international legitimacy, and they hope that China will provide that international legitimacy to them. But in fact, it hasn't panned out. The exports from the region to China still are a little bit under 2 billion, which is less than 4% of exports. It's shrinking for Taiwan. Meanwhile, imports are growing rapidly to about 15% of imports. And then we look at what it's like with the United States, where exports to the US are about a third of exports from the region. Much of the rest of the exports are between these countries, between neighbors. And say imports are here. So the trade deficit is still fairly high for both of them. But this is a country where you have a huge amount of exports, but in comparison to China, and still have the same essential trade deficit. One comment on this, on why this could be, is that even though you're promising, governments have been promising their countries that there's going to be, China's a massive market, we'll be able to export. Much of what Central America produces are the same things that are produced in Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, places that are much, much closer. So, so our primary exports are not something that is necessarily interesting to the Chinese market, price-wise. And that's part of the reason that it hasn't panned out. But it doesn't stop the propaganda from promising these huge benefits. So a little bit on the trends that we're seeing. One is how this relationship is supporting autocrats. And this is what worries us, I think, the most. There's starting to be strong ties with autocrats in terms of anti-American narratives, lots of agreements being signed in a couple of years. And we see as the goals between many of these countries, when we talk about autocrats in Central America, we're talking primarily about Nicaragua, and then El Salvador, which has developed strong autocratic tendencies in the past several years. And we're also seeing strong autocratic tendencies from Honduras, from the new government there. And so many of the things that they talk about publicly are isolating Taiwan, increasing the number of people in society who replicate Chinese propaganda, and what I mentioned earlier, the legitimacy that they gain when they feel rejected internationally by the United States and Europe, and so they can present to their population that they have the full backing of another international power. And I mentioned these things already. And so one of the ways in which it strengthens these autocrats, for instance, is that just to give an example, the main relationships between China and these countries are handled by family members of the leaders, right? It's not by the institutions. So this is all symbols of how these relationships are being used to strengthen the family power. So in Nicaragua, there's Laureano Ortega, who's the son of the president. Of course, Nicaragua was turned as very similar to a monarchy, where There's the president, his wife is a vice president, and then you have 8 children who run essentially huge parts of ministries, state-owned enterprises, etc. Right? So it's pretty ridiculous. And what we were saying that these tendencies are going in that direction. We have Karim Bukele, who is the brother of Nayib Bukele, who's also an important intermediary with Chinese relations. And we have Hortensia Zelaya, who's the daughter of the Honduran president. And yeah, so you see, I mean, just on prioritizing the relationship, this is already one way in which you are helping to debilitate the institutions of that country. And over the past couple of years, Nicaragua and Honduras have signed almost 40 agreements on issues like housing, transport, trade, and telecommunications. Laureano Ortega spends a lot of his time speaking to the Nicaraguan audience as well about the situation. For instance, playing up the idea that the dollar will be replaced in short order by the yuan, just talking about the lack of relevance of the United States nowadays, even though Nicaragua is still heavily dependent on the U.S. for trade. Some other examples of lack of transparency, the free trade agreements that are being rushed, essentially, behind closed doors, which has the private sector in these countries worried. In Honduras, these are some of our reports. Our reports on the Honduran process, which, according to the negotiations between China and Honduras, have to be completed within 1 year, and which Honduran private sector has been very clear that doesn't give them enough time to do the necessary consultations and do the necessary studies to come up with an FTA that's useful for them. There are similar conversations in El Salvador about an FTA agreement. There are efforts to replace Taiwan in the Regional Integration Organization, the CICA, for Central America. We've published a report on growing military relations, which still haven't gotten to the point of, say, purchasing large armaments, but at the very least, training of military officers in China, as well as lots of donations of security gear to these different countries, mainly for police, anti-riot gear, those kind of things, and then starting going into technology as well. And of course, we always recommend our case study on Panama, especially, with lots of examples of how this relationship depends on a lack of transparency in the agreements that are made for infrastructure. A lot of infrastructure which is key. For example, the 2 main ports in the country are controlled by China-owned companies. Disinformation. This information is not new to you all, but this is a very important thing in the region. Large numbers of journalists going from each country over there to China to be trained. Also, agreements between the Nicaraguan dictatorship and Chinese propaganda arm of the CCP for training. And so, a few more details about the disinformation aspect. Essentially, hang on to, say, an anti-American kind of discourse, especially from places like Nicaragua and more so El Salvador nowadays, discrediting, the necessity for liberal democracy. And the reason that these things are worrying to us, because as we've kind of argued here, it's supporting the abuse of power, which is already rampant in the area. It's strengthening the clientelistic networks and the family networks, and helping to centralize power there. Helping, of course, civil liberties and freedom of the press. And, of course, plays into this geostrategic conflict. So that was, okay, tried to be brief. But so we still have a few minutes, but so this is, these are the main issues that we wanted to present to you, things that are worrying us right now and that are changing very rapidly. So thank you, and let's open it up for a conversation. Kevin.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Hey, Kevin from the NED. So, question is on the issue of elite relationships in Central America. That as sort of this avenue for navigating the relationship with China. I see sort of how that works with your slide there about the family members of Nicaragua, Honduras, and El Salvador. What about in slightly more open democracies like Costa Rica, I guess Guatemala, Belize? I mean, you know your region better than I do. How does that work in terms of elite relationships that are involved in whether that's the economic investment from China or relations with the local ambassador or anything like that? Is it different? Is it more kind of open and transparent in a way, or is it something that you all worry about and find as an opportunity for malign influence in some way?
Yeah. I'll say that it is more open and you work directly with businessmen rather than just with, say, the or kind of royal family that's going on in Nicaragua. But there's still a huge lack of transparency issues, especially with the examples of Panama, for instance. In Panama, it's a democracy for sure. But, for instance, on the one hand, there's the example of all of the agreements that were done between China and Panama and that were signed by a previous administration. There were like 40 agreements, and not a single one of them was ratified by Congress, right? So these were all closed-door things, and of course, the lack of institutional strength in Panama allowed that to happen. But I think that Panamanian businessmen and Costa Rican businessmen can work a lot more directly with, say, their counterparts in China and with the government without having to go through the national government, which is not as much the case in Nicaragua, for instance. In Nicaragua, you do things, pretty much nothing happens without the Nicaraguan government stamp of approval. Did you want to add something, Javier?
Yeah, basically the Chinese way to do what they are doing there in Central America, they know very well where are the places where they don't need to talk with the political elites, and there's places where they really need to talk with the leaders like Bukele's family, Daniel Ortega. For them, I think that the Chinese diplomat and business people, they don't have to spend time talking with the Chamber of Commerce, with the industrialist chamber, nothing like that. It's go to Daniel Ortega, go to Bukele's family, go to Zelaya's people in Honduras, make the deal with them, and the rest is just matter of time about what is going to happen for our interests. But I also think that we need to work more on understanding the relation in general in Latin America between the political elites and China. I recall that I spent some years working with Inside Crime, that is an organization focused on organized crime, and we developed a project for 3 years. Then it was about to show evidence about the relation between the political and economical elites and the organized crime. I'm pretty sure that we have to do the same in the region to understand better that the kind of relation that the local politics in Argentina and the Jujuy provinces have with the Chinese business people and Chinese leader, because the Chinese understand very well the way to go to those regions, to those provinces, do the business with them, but there's few knowledge in general about the way they are doing the business there in several countries with the political and economical elite at the national level, but also at the regional level.
Yeah. Thank you, Javier. Hernan?
Thank you. We were talking this morning regarding Ecuador and the role of independent journalism and investigative journalism there to debunk a bit the corruption structure that Correa established in Ecuador with the Chinese companies and government. Do you, and your role at Expediente Abierto has a lot to do with, giving information, as you mentioned, with the first slide there, giving information to journalists, producing your own information regarding that. Do you envision the possibility of accessing some kind of contracts or more information regarding corruption and so on in the region to try to establish something similar to Ecuador?
Javier? Okay. Javier is the director of Expediente Abierto, and he also sees our journalism program
I just want
directly,
to emphasize again that we have a Expediente Abierto, which is the think tank, and within the Expediente Abierto, we have a very aggressive media program that they name it Expediente Público, no? So we have several journalists that have been trained in understanding China, and they are producing a bunch report analysis in Central America about China. Some of them we translated into English, but basically we have in general, in terms of access to information, a huge problem in Central America. I mean, I just spent some time in Honduras last week, and one of the main problems that the journalists told me is that they don't have access to any kind of information. And we have a law of that allow, I mean, we fought like for 5 years in all the region in order to approve the law of access of information. It works for a couple of 3-4 years. It's relatively well, but now I mean, we don't have access to information there. I mean, so everything that Expediente Público is producing is promises off the record. We need to, but certainly we have to access to the contract. We need to do it. We need to show the evidence. And there are opportunities. For instance, I've seen that we have opportunities in Honduras because they are just discussing the negotiating the free trade agreement. And I feel after my trip that we have opportunities of a nice alliance with the economical sector there, but they want some kind of transparency. They don't trust the government. They don't trust the level of negotiation. They don't trust anything regarding what the government is doing there in Honduras. So the problem is that they need to have access to the information from the government. They say, we have okay, we are negotiation. You can come with us to Beijing, but you have to stay in the separate room. Yeah, and then the government officers come to the room and they say, okay, we are doing this, and this. Okay, bye. But they don't allow any kind of question. They don't allow any kind of participation or contact with the Chinese officer when it's about to negotiate the free trade agreement. There's a lot to do there. But I think that despite all this, I think that there's a good opportunity to raise awareness in Guatemala. Also, our plan is go to Guatemala, try to work with the Taiwan diplomats there with USA and bring together both embassy and try to promote some dialogue that will bring awareness with the Guatemalan people about what is going to happen with China in the future.
Yeah, and I'll add that, I mean, lack of information was a problem even unrelated to China in general in all 6 countries, less so in Costa Rica and Panama. And given that there's little information locally, one issue that reporters have told us is that they're not even sure where to start when it comes to China issues. I mean, they don't want to sound uninformed when they write up their stories, but you know, they don't. There's many basic issues that they don't know about how it works, how the party works, what the interests are, what the background is, and of course, where to get information, because there is actually information that you can get in Chinese, and you know, you use translating software and all of this, but you have to learn how to just learn the very basics before you can start finding this information from other sources. But yeah, lack of information is a huge problem. I think we have 1 minute in case anybody wants to have a comment or anything of the sort. All right. Huh? 1 minute. So we'll end 1 minute early. Thank you all very much again, and we'll keep talking.